There is a specific kind of loneliness that only happens in crowded rooms. Not the loneliness of being alone, that one has a logic to it. This one happens when you are surrounded by people who are laughing and talking and moving through the room like they belong there, and something in you is watching it happen from somewhere far away. You are standing there, you are physically there, and somehow you are not there at all. This video is going to give that experience a name, not a diagnosis, not a label to carry. A name, the kind that makes you stop and think. That is exactly what this is. And then it's going to explain why it keeps happening, even when you want so badly for it not to. Now, let's look at what this actually feels like. Because there is a sequence, and if you felt this, you already know it. It might start before you even arrive. A low hum of something in your chest as you're getting ready. Not dread, exactly. More like a quiet preparation for something you can't quite name. You walk in, and for the first 2 seconds, maybe 3, you're just there. Present. Neutral. Taking it in. Then something shifts. The scan starts. Eyes move across the room without you deciding to move them. Who's here? Who's talking to whom? Where the clusters are. Where there might be a gap you could fill. And whether you actually could. You find someone you know. You move toward them. And somewhere in the 3 steps it takes to get there, something starts editing. The thing you were going to say gets shorter. The version of you that was about to arrive gets quieter. By the time you're standing next to them, you're already half gone. The conversation happens. You are in it. You laugh when it's right to laugh. You ask questions. You nod. And the whole time, underneath all of it, there is a part of you that is watching from outside the glass, tallying, checking, running a quiet audit of every word leaving your mouth. Was that too much? Was that not enough? Did they notice that pause? Did that land wrong? And then, the particular grief of it, someone else says something. The room responds. Laughter, agreement, the small warm current of people connecting. And you think, why didn't I say that? Or, I almost said that. Or just, the quiet, specific ache of watching a moment pass that you were standing right next to and somehow couldn't reach. You leave the room. Sometimes physically, sometimes just internally, and you take inventory on the way home. Everything that happened, everything that didn't, every version of yourself you considered showing and put away. That is not shyness. That is not introversion. That is not a personality quirk or a social skill gap or something that would be fixed if you just pushed yourself a little more. That is something specific. And it has a name. To understand why this keeps happening, we need to look at what's actually going on underneath the surface. Your nervous system does not distinguish cleanly between physical danger and social danger. That is not a metaphor. That is what the research actually shows. When your brain registers the possibility of social threat, judgment, rejection, being seen as inadequate, it activates many of the same systems it would activate if the threat were physical. Heart rate shifts. Attention narrows. The monitoring system comes online. And here is the part that explains everything about what you just described. When the monitoring system is running, it consumes the exact cognitive and emotional resources you would need to actually be present. Think about what presence requires. It requires bandwidth, the ability to track what someone is saying, feel something in response to it, form a genuine thought, and then let that thought move toward the other person without checking it 3 times first. But when the monitoring system is active, when part of your brain is running a constant audit of how you're being perceived, that bandwidth is already spoken for. You are not distracted. You are occupied. Running 2 processes simultaneously, the conversation happening on the outside and the threat assessment happening underneath. And here is what that does. It makes genuine connection feel impossible, not because you don't want it, not because you lack the social ability, but because the part of you that would reach toward another person is busy making sure it's safe to do so. You end up there in body and somewhere else entirely in experience. Present but not present. Visible but feeling invisible. This is not a character flaw. This is a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. The question that actually matters, the one this video is building toward, is where did it learn to do this? Because the answer to that question is the answer to why you can't simply decide your way out of it. And it's the answer that finally stops this from feeling like a verdict on who you are. This brings us to the most important part, where this pattern was learned. You were not born with this. At some point, and it may have been early or it may have been a specific season of your life that was harder than others, Your nervous system received consistent feedback that being visible had a cost. Maybe the feedback was explicit. A parent whose attention came with conditions. A classroom where standing out attracted the wrong kind of notice. A friendship group where the social rules were enforced in ways that were subtle and precise and landed anyway. Maybe it wasn't dramatic. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it was just the cumulative weight of small moments where you reached toward connection and something came back that was less than what you needed. And so the part of you that learned to protect itself this way made an adaptation. If being visible is risky, be less visible. If taking up space attracts a specific kind of pain, take up less space. If being fully yourself in a room has cost you something before, send a safer version instead. That adaptation was not a mistake. It was intelligent. It was the most reasonable response available to a person who was in a situation they couldn't fully control and needed to reduce the damage. The version of you that learned to disappear into rooms was not making an error in judgment. It was making the only safe choice it could find. Here is where the grief lives, because that adaptation, the monitoring, the editing, the watching from outside the glass, it worked. It protected you from something real. And then it stayed. It stayed long after the specific situation that required it had changed. It kept running the old pattern in new rooms. Rooms where the original threat was no longer present in the same form. Rooms where you actually had permission to be there. Rooms where people would have been glad to know you, and it kept pulling you back behind the glass anyway. You were never invisible. You learned to disappear, and that distinction, quiet as it is, changes everything, because something that was learned is something that can be unlearned. Not all at once, not through a decision, but through a different kind of understanding than the one you've had until now. If this video has started to name something you've been carrying for a long time, and you want to understand your specific layer of it, there's a self-assessment in the description called the mirror test. It takes about 20 minutes, and it's built to show you exactly which part of your self-worth pattern is asking for the most attention right now, with language precise enough to actually use. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. Now let's talk about what actually begins to interrupt this pattern. Here is what does not work, and it's worth saying plainly, because you may have already tried it. Telling yourself to be more present does not work. Not when the monitoring system is running, because presence is not a decision you can make while another process is consuming the resources presence requires. Pushing yourself to speak more does not work, not as a first step, because more words from a defended place just means more words running through the audit before they leave. What actually begins to interrupt the pattern is something quieter and more counterintuitive. It is the moment you stop trying to manage how you're being perceived and start, just slightly, just for a moment, getting genuinely curious about the person in front of you. Not as a technique, not as a social strategy to deploy, as a redirection of attention. Because here is what the research on social connection consistently shows. The experience of genuine curiosity about another person activates a different neurological state than self-monitoring does. It is physically impossible to be deeply curious about someone else and simultaneously running a full audit of your own performance. The two processes compete for the same resources, and curiosity, real curiosity, not performed interest, wins. This is not a fix. One moment of curiosity does not undo what took years to build, but it is a real interruption, a small gap in the pattern, a moment where the monitoring system pauses because something pulled your attention somewhere more interesting than the audit. And in that gap, even a small one, even just for a sentence or two, you are actually there. Not performing presence. Present. The person you've been in those rooms. The one watching from outside the glass, editing, shrinking, leaving early. That person was not failing. That person was running the only protection system they had. What you have now is something you didn't have before you watched this video. You have the name of the mechanism. You know where it came from. You know what it was protecting you from and why it stayed. That is not nothing. It is, in fact, the beginning of something real. If this opens something you want to understand more specifically, which layer of this is yours and what it's been costing you. The mirror test in the description was built exactly for that moment. Think about the last time you felt invisible in a room full of people. What was the moment you realized you'd already half disappeared? You have been in a lot of rooms. You have stood at the edges of conversations and watched other people move through them like they were given some instruction manual you never received. You have gone home and replayed it. Wondered what it is about you that makes connection feel like something that happens to other people. wondered if maybe the invisibility is just true. It isn't. What is true is this. At some point, a version of you that was trying to stay safe built a system that kept you protected by keeping you just far enough from the room to not get hurt by it. That system worked. It cost you things, real things, moments that mattered. But it worked, in the way it was designed to work. What today gave you is a different way to see that. Not, there is something wrong with me that makes me invisible. But I learned a very specific pattern of protection, and I now understand exactly how it works. Patterns with names can be changed, not through force, not through deciding harder, through the kind of understanding that quietly removes the shame from something and replaces it with, I see you, I know what you are, and I know you are not permanent. You were never invisible. You learned to disappear. And the fact that you're here, that you watched this to the end, that you were willing to sit with something this honest about what it costs, that is the part of you that was right to bring you here. That part knows something the monitoring system doesn't. It knows you were not built for the edges of rooms. You already know something shifted. Keep going.